All right, so today I want to talk about the .NET CLI. There's a feature that I love to use when it comes to building an application. Before I do that, though, I'll show you the app. It's just a simple .NET web application, a web API. When I run it here, use curl. It's the default example that you can spit out with .NET New. So it's got a little weather forecast endpoint. Nothing that exciting. What I want to show you, though, is how do I go from, kill this off here, how do I go from this particular project file here, how do I get from that into that running application? Doesn't look like there's a lot inside of here. In fact, if I list out my files here, you can see I have a program.cs, sort of the bulk of the code resides. How does that get linked into this project file? There's no reference to it here, and then compiled into the running application. Well, it turns out that's where this SDK attribute comes from in the project element. This specifies that I want to use an SDK called the Web SDK. So what exactly is that? Well, it turns out it's a set of targets and properties for the build system, msbuild, that imports a bunch of defaults, for example, how to include various files to compile into the application. And that might all seem like magic, the convention of including files and then compiling things for you. And it is magic unless you look under the hood. So if I clear this out here, if I were to perform a .NET build, I could pass an argument -pp, then a colon. I can specify the name of a file, like msbuild.xml. When I do that, that will preprocess the API.cs project file that we've got here. And it'll spit out a combined file that has everything included inside of it so you can see what exactly is happening behind the scenes. So if I open that up with VS Code, this is a big, long file. We've got a project element just like before. And then we have things like specifying the default targets. Targets are what are built when you run msbuild. So the build is there by default. And if you scroll through here, you'll see there are some includes right away, one of which references the Microsoft Net SDK Web. So because we had the SDK attribute set to this value, we then included this particular property file. And then we also included this set of props. If you go through here, you'll see all the various imports that happened and then the combined XML file. And so if you look through here, you can look for compile elements. One of the very first ones that you hit is inside of an item group, and it includes all files in the current directory and below that have the default language source extension. So if I wonder what that default language source extension is, I could look for that. And if I just tab through the results here, you can see there's a property group that defines the default language source extension to be .cs. So that's how my C# files are included, which of course would be that program.cs file. Or maybe you're interested in some other aspects like how is assembly information generated using this system? If you're aware of a .NET app, you know there's assembly info that gets compiled. And that's by default or by convention. Well, you could look in here for generated assembly info, and you'll find properties as well as targets that are involved in creating the generated assembly info. Now, there's a lot in here. You can see I'm only on line 13,000 right now. I'm not even I'm a little bit over halfway through this file. There's a lot in here, but I find this helpful to look through this if you wonder how something's working under the hood, especially if you have some sort of problem with your build. Definitely use this to dump everything and take a look at what's actually being used behind the scenes when you run a .NET build. And again, the parameter is just to pass -pp for preprocess and then spit out into an XML file, which is the same thing as you would have with a CS proj file or any msbuild project file.